Alright, good morning class, and today we're going to be examining this assignment that I gave to you guys on ICT Day. It's the scene where there's a confrontation between grandmother and father. And I a bit apologize because the podcast was entered a bit late because I had to go kayaking with my NCC kids, so it's really very tired, and you can see I'm a bit sunburned, it's a bit black. Yeah, I'm a bit blacker than usual. And in the course of this podcast, you will hear a bit of meowing, and that's because of my cats. Well, they are meowing in the background. And yeah, if the meowing concerns you, I apologize for it. Maybe I can show you what he looks like. Here you go, here you go. Hey, see. He looks so unwilling, but you hear the meowing, that's because of him and his brother. They're just hungry. Okay, it's 3 a.m. and they think that there's food around. So, okay, here you go. Right. Okay, so let's get this out of the way, and hopefully by the end of the podcast, you'll be able to do your assignment. Okay. Right. So let's examine this passage that's been given to us. It's the beginning scene. And before we talk about this, right, we need to talk about the things that happened just before the scene that set the context of why we are examining this scene in the first place. So, before this, just before we started, right, just before this scene, okay, the scene that comes before this is the scene where Bruno meets Pavel for the first time, and Pavel shows a lot of kindness in helping Bruno to retrieve a tire and clean his wound when he falls off the swing. After Mother discovers that Pavel has helped Bruno, right, she tells Pavel to lie about having helped Bruno, and obviously it's because she doesn't really want to be associated with the Jews, and she doesn't want to be seen as someone who's collaborating and cooperating with them. And so far we have seen two different attitudes towards the Jews. Number one, right, we see people like Kotler who hate and despise the Jews and would not hesitate to inflict any cruelty upon them. And we also see the attitudes of people like Maria, who is obviously a sympathizer, and Maria's stance is very different from grandmother's, right? Even though Maria and grandmother both despise the soldiers, Maria adopts a more passive attitude. She doesn't openly criticize them, whereas at this scene you will see that grandmother is far more active in her criticism and far more vocal than Maria, right? And she actively questions father's role. And so the writer therefore brings us backward in time, from away from Outwave back to Berlin, to the scene right after to a scene that happens right after, I suppose, the meeting with the Fury. And the writer forces us to examine father's own stance towards these atrocities towards which he is committing. And so we are supposed to understand from father's reaction that he's very far. He's not really a cruel kind of person, maybe, right? Maybe that he's being motivated by forces beyond his control. And that so far we've been seeing how he tries to take a moral stance against it, right? Like he explains to Bruno that they have no choice, that they're being forced to do this. Not that they have no choice. Sorry, he's trying to explain to Bruno that this is the right thing to do. But as you can see, with grandmother, right, when she points out that it definitely isn't, he doesn't really get outraged, doesn't criticize her. In fact, from his lack of response, it kind of suggests that he actually agrees with her. Okay, so that's what we're going to discuss today. Okay, right. So let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at the scene proper. Okay, so before we start the scene, we also need to know that that grandmother is predominantly known as an affectionate and kindly woman. For example, in the beginning, in the previous chapter, when Bruno meets father, which we discussed, okay, he remembers that father is not really the kind of affectionate person that grandmother and mother are. Okay, and this tells us that this frames our expectations of what grandmother is supposed to be like. But when we see grandmother here, right, she doesn't seem anything like the kindly person that Bruno seems to imagine. Yes, and as a reader, this forces us to examine what she's actually angry about. Why is she so angry? Does it really contradict our view that she's not as kind a person as we expect? Right. So let's take a look at this scene. Okay. So over here, right, at the very first portion of the scene, right, we notice that Bruno doesn't really know what's going on. He doesn't know that father has now been promoted, and he vaguely calls it, right? He vaguely says that it has something to do with the fact that father was now addressed as a commandant, and he notices that there has been nothing but excitement for weeks. Okay, and mother, we notice the reactions of everybody else, okay, which suggests that father's promotions will be something to be proud of. Okay, we notice that mother is a very supportive wife, right? She tells Bruno to congratulate father, okay, even though Bruno doesn't really know what's going on, and there's a bit of a joke here about the dramatic irony of it. We know that Bruno's father has just received an important appointment, but here's his son, not exactly knowing what it means, but congratulating him anyway, right? This kind of shows mother's more sympathetic side, right? That she tries to act as a supportive wife. She even kissed in front of the rest of the household, in front of Bruno. She even kisses father and praised him for his competence and ambition. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That over here. See, right? She kissed him, and she commented about how fine she thought the fabric was. Yeah, and it's kind of a put up situation because it's in front of everybody, it's in front of the servants, in front of the children. So I'm not sure whether it's very intimate in the first place. Uh, the irony, of course, is that Bruno doesn't know what exactly the whole family is celebrating, and it also tells us that maybe like father's achievement is not as important, not as special as it really supposed to be, right? Even though everybody's excited about it, but um, the importance of it is not clearly apparent to anyone, right? And the formal, um, the way he acts, right, is very formal, it's very stilted, and it doesn't really show any. It doesn't show him to be a very kindly and empathetic person. So it doesn't seem like he's a commandant because he's a nice person, right? He's more of a commandant because he is capable of producing results, even though those results are not the ones that are kind to the Jews. Okay, and his fine appearance suggests that the dinner is more of a celebration of father's achievement rather than Christmas. So so the scene doesn't seem to be a very formal. It doesn't seem to be a very doesn't seem to be a very genuine thing, right? It's more for the sake of celebrating father's achievement, and right, this father's own pride in his achievement, like how the soldiers, Bruno notices how the soldiers respect him more because of it. That's over here, right? The soldiers who came in and out of there and used the place, right? The way they react to it as if there were something to be excited about, and father's own pride is shown when he only lets Bruno touch it provided his hands were clean. That's over here. Uh, he was allowed to touch it provided his hands were clean when he put it on. And this shows father's own pride about his own achievements. But obviously in the scene that comes, grandmother kind of ridicules him and mocks him. And at this moment you feel a bit sorry for father, right? Because okay, we don't really know whether he genuinely feels towards his cause, but we do know, okay, that there is a stance that he is expected to take, and he does it, right? He fulfills that requirement, even though he may not necessarily feel proud of what he's doing. Okay, so over here in this scene, right, we have the symbol of the uniform, right? It shows us that father's wearing of the uniform, right, shows his new position of authority and command, and that it comes with much respect and authority. But let's look at grandmother, right? Let's look at grandfather first, right? Grandfather is we know that he's kind of a people the a man of the party, right? He's very proud of Bruno's father, and his name is Matthias, right, from the scene from which you know. Okay, and therefore you also know that that father's name is Ralph. Okay, so grandfather is the one who's very supportive, right? Who thoroughly believes in the cause of the Nazi Party, right? And tries to endorse it. But that endorsement is always hollow whenever grandmother speaks up. So we notice grandmother's reaction. She says, "I wonder, is this where I went wrong with you, Ralph?" Right? And that kind of suggests that she thinks that that she's implying, right, that father is acting the way he did because of his upbringing, which she's responsible for, but she's also trying to say that father, right, is doing something morally wrong, something reprehensible. Okay, and she uses the phrase, this metaphor, right, dressing up like a puppet on a string. And that metaphor kind of tells us something about his job, right? That she thinks the way, because of the way he dresses, even though he seems to be very self-important and seems to be very commanding, right? That he looks that by calling a puppet on a string, she's suggesting that he's very that in fact he's being controlled by somebody else, and therefore he's rather helpless, and he's very foolish, right? He seems to be taking pride for something that he really shouldn't be proud of, and that his authority holds very little substance, right? That he's merely following the orders of a higher party, and he's not really using his authority to do anything of real good. Okay, and she doesn't respect him because of the way he wields this authority, right? He doesn't use it wisely. He doesn't use it to impact the people under him, right? The prisoners, but instead he uses it blindly, just following the orders of his superiors. And the conflict comes from grandmother, right? She's very determined to voice her opinion, right? Even though father tries to silence her. You know this is where father says, right, in a tolerant voice, says, "Now, mother." You notice the tone is very patient, right? But she doesn't stop there, right? Father says, "This isn't the time," because there's obviously people around, there's soldiers around, there's servants around, and yet grandmother is determined to say what she feels, and she's determined to make her criticism heard, right? No matter how unpopular her criticism is, right? Because obviously it was a kind of a sensitive thing to voice your criticism openly, because you could be reported at any time for disloyalty, which we will see later with Lieutenant Cutler and the way father questions him. Okay, and we can see that how she's very distasteful for father's work, right? As if his work made him something special, when she's trying to suggest that he's not, right? He's only blindly following orders. And Bruno even tells us how she always found a way to voice her opinion, no matter how unpopular it was. Yeah, so grandma seems to be implying that father's work is very meaningless and trivial, and she's mocking the pride and self-importance with which he displays his uniform. And her mounting anger, you can sense her mounting anger and frustration when she mocks grandfather for his supportiveness, right? Yes, you see over here when grandfather says, "Natalie, we discussed this," and she said, "You discussed it, Matthias. I was the blank wall." And when father talks about how when uh when grandfather talks about how the Great War began, and how father's achievements stem from his brave performance in the First World War, grandmother contradicts him and says and insists that Ralph's participation in the war has conditioned him to accept the cruelty which he inflicts on others now, and that's why she says he did come to harm Matthias, right? Telling grandfather. Okay. And her anger increases when she says, right, when grandfather defends father, calling his position a responsible position, and his pride at having seen father being elevated, and grandmother gets exasperated. She finally exclaims, "Which one of you is more foolish, I wonder?" And that brings to mind how I mean how the people of Germany didn't never really stopped the soldiers for their cruelty, and instead instead enabled them to carry on their cruelties without objecting, without criticism, without rebellion, without defiance, right? Very few people actually spoke out against the Nazi party, even though they may have disagreed with the way the Jews were being handled. Okay, and even though mother tries to soften the blow, okay, mother tries to keep the peace by saying, by praising father for his new uniform over here, right? She tries to calm the situation down. Instead of that actually working, grandmother's anger is now directed at her. Instead, grandmother uses the word that she uses, handsome, right? And she criticizes her for being a foolish girl, foolish for taking pride in something that for allowing something that she should have stopped from the very start. And she mocks her for her lack of awareness of the actual situation of what's going on, right? Is that what you consider be of importance in the world, looking handsome? Suggesting that that mother's supportiveness, that mother shouldn't be acting supportive in the first place, right? That she should actually be stopping father from taking up the role, that she should be like grandmother voicing her rage against father, right? But as we can see from the earlier scenes, especially in the first chapter, you know that we know that mother is not exactly supportive either, but she keeps her concerns quiet. She has voiced them to father in private, but she has not actually done it in public. And so we get how father and we in a way we grandmother is not just upset with father, of course, right? She's also upset at her own submissive role, and how the women in the family are expected to follow their husbands. All right. She's really upset at the submissive role in which women have been given. You see, she calls herself a blank wall to whom you have addressed your words as usual, implying, of course, that the women feel very strongly against the cruelties of the Nazi party, and yet they are not consulted, their opinions are not respected. And so she's not just angry against father, but she's also perhaps frustrated at her own role as a woman, right? So, so therefore, right, after examining this scene, when you attempt the question, okay, the writer asks you, so we ask you, right, how does the writer make you feel sorry for father in this passage? I expect you to say a couple of things, right? I expect you to describe for me the conflict between grandmother and father, and how father is not, how you feel sorry for father because of the passive way in which he reacts towards grandmother, and you can therefore sense his hesitation towards his own role and the respect he has towards grandmother and grandfather. Okay, and you can then describe grandmother's anger for me, and the powerlessness that father feels, right? That his moment of pride is being taken away by his own parents, grandmother, okay, and the treatment that he is subjected to from his family. I actually forgot to mention as well. He says at the end, okay, the ending scene is very interesting about how Bruno comes on and wearing the red and black outfit of a circus ringmaster. So earlier when we discussed the symbol of the uniform, and we talk about how it's a symbol of authority, when Bruno comes out in the red and black outfit of a circus ringmaster, right, there's a moment of dramatic irony here, and Bruno doesn't realize that the outfit that he's wearing of a circus ringmaster is actually comparable to father's own uniform. And by Bruno wearing it, he inadvertently compares father's role to that of a ringmaster, right? Like he is managing a circus of animals, and the soldiers are like animals that inflicting their brutality, and how their actions are meaningless and pointless, much like that of a circus, right? That it's ridiculous, and it's not really doing anything effective, and it's not really something to be proud of. And the hilarious reaction of the adults. The adults all looked his way in Gretel's direction as if they had forgotten they were there at all. So Bruno by using the word handsome and coming out in the ringmaster's costume, right? Bruno is inadvertently mocking his own father's role in the war, as if he were no better than a ringmaster, and yet he doesn't sense it, right? And that moment is really that is the highest point of the criticism against father, right? That even Bruno seems to be criticizing it without really realizing it as well, and that should make you feel a bit sorry for father, right? So I talked about part one, so I hope you'll be able to do part one properly. Part two is a bit more, it's a bit different, right? Part two asks you, does your opinion of father change following this incident? Okay, so for this part two, right, you need to refer to elsewhere in the text, not just the scene, and therefore you need to look at the notes that I gave you to talk about father. And since over here, right, in the first part of the question, you already the argument is that you feel sorry for father. Therefore, you kind of have to take you're expected to take the opposite actually, that in part two, right, you also say the opposite. That at first, that if you want to say that your opinion of father has changed, then you've got to say how you formed a negative opinion of father in the first place, and then after that you can discuss the flaws that he had, referring to the notes in the question. Okay, that's it. So that's it. I hope that the question is more doable, and I hope I haven't taken too much of your time. The podcast was only supposed to be 15 minutes, and then you're supposed to spend the rest of the hour doing the assignment itself. And yeah, my cat's here again. Let's say bye bye. So, oh, doesn't want to be in front of the camera. Doesn't want to be in front of the camera. Okay, good night, and I hope your assignments will be well done. And please remember to do your assignments properly because we will be counting it in the CA. Right, thank you.